Stand when I do this, or okay, okay, yeah, all right. uh, you know what? I had a ketchup cereal breakfast this morning. Always gets me. I'm Steve, by the way. Josh, AP. You a photog for APTN, or you a writer, or
I'm
a DJ? So, like, if he's gonna be there, I might stand to get his attention.
Yeah, I think there's going to be people doing this with mics. I think they're bringing mics around.
Okay.
But yeah, that's fine. Whatever's natural. If you want to have eye contact, you want to.
They've only got one working mic, so I don't know if they can speak out.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. At this time, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Henri Ford, who is the Chief Academic Officer and the Dean of the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine.
Thank you so much, and let me say welcome to all of you, and welcome to the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. I'm delighted that you have joined us for what is truly a momentous occasion when we get to hear from the team of doctors and their collaborator from the University of Pittsburgh who evaluated the first group of diplomats who were affected by this truly unknown phenomenon in Havana last year. It is truly a perfect example of what scientific collaboration and what I call team science can really do in helping us solve some of the vexing healthcare challenges that we face. The report you're about to hear from our physicians and collaborators who first were involved in the treatment of these patients really underscore what probably happened, and it's going to be quite illuminating to hear from them as far as their understanding of what may have transpired. Without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Michael Hofer, Dr. Bonnie Levin, Dr. Hilary Snap, Dr. Consensus Peluso, as well as the collaborator from the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Carrie Balaban.
We'll start in English y seguimos en español después.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much for coming down. Before I start, I want to say what this is today is honoring a promise that our public affairs people made to all of you over the last 18 months. We cannot publish scientifically and talk publicly before an article comes out. So many of you, almost all of you, contacted our public affairs department and said, I want to speak with them. And we said, when the article comes out, we'll do everyone together, we'll give everyone the same opportunity. That is the reason we're here today. It's just to talk about the article that you all wanted information about before, and to do it so everyone gets the same opportunity at the same period of time. And when we stray from talking about the article, we'll try to direct you back to that, because that's the purpose of today, the article that we published. Many of you got a PDF, but there'll be a URL where everyone can go on the URL, and anyone in the world can go on the URL and see the article. So with that as a rejoinder, in February of 2017, I got an interesting phone call. After serving 21 years in the military and now being here 5 years at UM, I never even got this phone call when I was in the military. And the phone call was, this is the State Department, we have a problem. And the individual on the phone told me about an individual in Havana who had heard odd noises, had felt some pain in his ear, and had ringing in his ear. And the next morning was dizzy and confused. And the rationale for calling me was the following. Number one, Dr. Balaban and I have extensive experience with blast trauma and have published extensively on that. And this sounded to them initially like a blast trauma. Number two, I still had a security clearance, still have a security clearance. At that point, it was secure. And number three, we're in Miami. Almost very commonly, diplomats in the United States who are stationed in Central Latin America, South America, or the Caribbean come to Miami to go to Costco or go to Walmart. So they could easily transport people up here to see us without raising any odd concerns, like if they would go to, Washington State or something. So we saw that individual, and then with the wonderful help of our people in otolaryngology and neurology, saw more individuals, most referred by the State Department, but some self-referred. And what we found, and we're going to describe today, is objective evidence of balance disorders that affect the gravity organs and unique cognitive dysfunction. So this is objective, it's not controversial, the evidence is there, the people had abnormalities. The take-home points for you all are, this is the first and only report of the individual seen acutely shortly after their injury. It's not affected by time, which can change people's disease presentations. It's not affected by variable amounts of treatment. Like if you get a little treatment or get a little medicine, that may change what you look like. It's not affected by workers' comp concerns. And it's not affected by media coverage of what you should complain of. So not only is it the first and only, there can never be another one, because now that the media's covered it, people know what to complain about. So it's the only one that's ever going to come out as the first naive report of this condition. It does not seem to resemble traumatic brain injury in the way that our extensive experience has shown it. We're not saying it's not an injury to the brain, it may be. We do know for sure that it's an injury to the ear and that the brain is affected. Is the brain affected from the ear? Is the brain affected directly? We don't know and can't determine that yet. This is retrospective, and that's important for everyone to understand. We saw these individuals as patients. When you are seeing individuals as patients, all you can do is what's medically indicated when the patient sees you. They come see me for a hearing loss, they get a hearing test. They come see me for a balance disorder, they get a balance test. Not only that, we had to work within the time frame they were given to us, and we had to get insurance approval for everything we did. We sometimes only had the individual for a day. We couldn't get every test in a day. We sometimes, only had the individual for half a day. So it's important to understand that we did this for patient care, and then later on went to our IRB and got approval to look at the data in a retrospective fashion. So yeah, there are holes because that's what happens when you see patients for medical care. If you do a prospective study and do the same thing on everyone, you have to get consent in advance. And these patients were not consented in advance. They were seeing us as patients. So before moving on to the rest of our colleagues, I do want to single out one group. I'll have some more thank yous later on. But there's a number of medical individuals and individuals at the State Department who are dedicated, hardworking individuals who have really spent the last year to year and a half working on this. I'm not allowed to give their names, but these people are wonderful, and they're really heroes in my book. We have no issues with what the State Department did. They're a great group of individuals, and I'm only sorry that I cannot name their names today. I'll have some thank yous to the people in Miami at the end of the presentations, but now I'll turn over to Dr. Hilary Snap, our Director of Audiology at the University of Miami. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all. So as Dr. Hoffer mentioned, my name is Hilary Snap, and I am a clinician scientist. I maintain a practice in evaluating patients with balance disorder, and so that was really my role here with these individuals. And as he mentioned, we saw them as clinical patients acutely. When these individuals presented to our clinic, their primary complaints were of dizziness and disorientation. Some of them also complained of auditory concerns or hearing concerns. And upon evaluation, we found a distinct clinical profile. Auditory assessment was really unremarkable. So although they were concerned of their hearing due to a perception of hearing a sound or feeling a pressure in their ear, our standard clinical hearing test did not reveal hearing loss, except in 2 individuals who were determined to have had a pre-existing hearing loss prior to coming to our clinic. When we evaluated them for balance, we found a distinct profile that showed universal abnormalities in this group in the otolithic organs. And so this is the part of the balance system that senses gravity and linear acceleration. If you look to the paper, you'll see that there were 2 specific tests that we did that were particularly helpful in this. The first is known as the VEMP test, or the Vestibular Evoked Myogenic Potential Test. And what this is a test that investigates the balance nerve and the otolithic organs. It's a myogenic potential, meaning that we measure it in the muscle, and it is evoked in response to a very loud acoustic stimulus, which in turn is, again, measured in the muscle, and the response reflects activity that is mediated by the vestibular system or our balance system. The second test, the SVV test, or Subjective Visual Vertical Test, assesses one's ability to orient a line vertically relative to the earth. So we present a line in a darkened room that's off-center, leaning to the right or left, starting at various angles, and the task is for the individual to set it vertical or straight up and down. And we do this in the absence of any other visual input, and that's an important component because when we remove the visual input and put them into a darkened room, they have to rely on their balance system to help them make judgments about how to orient things up and down. And so these were the 2 primary findings leaning towards a issue in the balance system or the inner ear. So our balance organ is inside of the inner ear. It is coupled to our auditory organ, and its responsibility is to detect movement. And so when we move our head, this balance organ detects movement and integrates that information in the brain with visual input as well as proprioceptive input. And that allows us to maintain our balance and to maintain our orientation in space. And so there's 2 primary components to this organ, the first being one that detects rotational movement, so turning your head, and the other component that detects linear movement, such as going up in an elevator. And this is the part that also senses gravity. So there's a reason why you're in an elevator. When you're in an elevator and you're moving up, you can sense that you're moving up even though visually you don't see anything moving around you. And that's because gravity is pulling on that organ and providing that information to us. When that organ loses the ability to appropriately sense gravity, concepts like up and down become meaningless, and it can be very disorienting to a patient. And it's also difficult for a patient to characterize. Issues like this in this part of the organ, the gravity center, are distinctly different from common ailments that we see with patients complaining of dizziness, specifically a spinning sensation or vertigo. This population did not primarily complain of spinning. They complained of feeling off, disoriented, or imbalanced, which was strongly linked, again, to the objective findings of issues in this otolith organ, or the gravity sensor. It's also strongly linked to the neurocognitive findings that we found subsequently that I will go ahead and pass on to Dr. Levin to describe to you next.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Bonnie Levin. I am the founder and director of the Division of Neuropsychology and professor of neurology, Department of Neurology here in the Miller School of Medicine. I also saw these patients in the acute phase, and as Dr. Hoffer mentioned, one of the opportunities that one has seeing someone in the acute phase is that they come in with symptoms. They haven't been formally diagnosed. There's no label. There's no expectations. And once they undergo testing and they are formally labeled, this naturally from people take on a meaning of a bona fide problem, and it takes on a life of its own. So we actually saw these individuals before formal diagnosis, and we were able to see people at a time when they were just complaining of individual symptoms. My assessment of these individuals is that the individual symptoms were not random, they were not isolated, and actually they fit together as a constellation of symptoms that would that have been shown in the literature through animal and human studies that these problems cluster together: vestibular, cognitive, and emotional complaints. Specifically, when we evaluated these individuals, their subjective and behavioral complaints consisted of what we call a cognitive fog, that something wasn't right, they felt off, they felt imbalanced in their thinking. Increased anxiety and irritability was practically uniform. Trouble regulating their emotion, feeling ups and downs, moodiness, again with anxiety, irritability, low frustration tolerance, difficulty paying attention and staying on task demands, problems with rapid decision making, especially under complex conditions, reduced organizational skills, and problems retrieving information on demand. This was the constellation of cognitive and subjective emotional and behavioral complaints. Neuropsychological testing, in fact, confirmed these subjective symptoms: reduced complex auditory processing, word-finding difficulties, difficulties involving sustained focused attention and vigilance, problems organizing sequential material during increasingly high levels of cognitive demand, and compromised working memory, less efficient learning and retrieval of information in conditions with competing information. So again, these were not under simple conditions, they were in complex, high demand tasks. The key points I want to make are that their subjective complaints were in fact confirmed by objective neuropsychological testing, demonstrating a unique constellation of behavioral and cognitive and emotional dysfunction, that these findings cluster together in a way that there's animal and clinical literature showing that these types of symptoms have in fact been reported in studies with who have received vestibular damage or dysfunction. There are animal studies showing that vestibular dysfunction has resulted in increased irritability and cognitive deficits in an animal model as well as in clinical models. That we don't understand the exact source, but that we do believe that there is a common neural circuitry or anatomic pathway that underlies this particular constellation of events which involve vestibular, cognitive, and emotional changes.
Good morning. My name is Carrie Balaban. I'm currently professor of otolaryngology at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. where I've been a faculty member since 1988. Just a brief bit of background to why you see the scientist, this basic scientist from another university sitting here. My doctoral research was done at University of Chicago in what became neuroscience afterwards. And I experienced in neurophysiology, particularly of the central vestibular system. As a postdoc, I first got that at University of Tokyo, in Tokyo, Japan. My research program and the way I've approached this is multidisciplinary. I approach biology from what we call a system of systems approach, which means we approach the human function as a complex system made up of smaller subsystems working together. Vestibular system works with a visual system, works with our system of pressure sensation to judge where we are in the world in relation to gravity and whether we're in a vehicle moving, and to make assumptions about this. They assist us basically in situation awareness about where we are. And so injury to the vestibular system and the vestibular periphery can disrupt our situational awareness. That's part of what underlies the cognitive fog that Dr. Levin was talking about. A lot of this work that I've, over the last several decades that I've done on this, has resulted in identification of circuits and some formal models for why we see so much co-occurrence of balance disorders, specific forms of anxiety disorders, and migraine headaches. We can get more into this in details later on, but there are common neural circuits and common transmitters that underlie much of this. And sort of because of this background and the fact that Dr. Hoffer and I have been close collaborators for about 25 years now, when he first heard about this and saw part of the problem, he called me in to help figure out scientifically, as part of modern team science, how do we proceed on this? The most important thing is people received a possible unknown exposure. They're showing something that looks a little bit strange. Let's get the personnel on board that we can at least figure out within the constraints, the difficult constraints of, here they are reported for clinical observation, and you can only do things that are diagnostically justified. How do we figure out what we can? These are some of the results that we've presented in the paper. One of the important things I want to talk about that's in the background and hasn't been addressed is the possibility of a directed energy exposure to these people, which has been mentioned widely, as we all know, in the popular press. Directed energy is basically what we say it is. It's some direction of, it's some energy in some form, pointed, focused on an object or on a person. The energy may be acoustic, pressure waves. You've probably heard of LRAD devices they've discussed in the press. So ultrasound is one mode that can be used for this. We also can have radio frequency. We could have microwave. We could have light. Lasers are an example of it. I'm going through these just as examples. I'm agnostic as to what may have happened. I'll tell you right off, I don't know. But these are in the literature, and there are possible precedents that one needs to think about if we want to understand what happened to these individuals, what may happen in the future, and more importantly, to diagnose and deliver better care, the best care to our people who we have the utmost respect for, putting themselves in harm's way for all of us, and deserve all of our best efforts here when we see something that may have happened, whether inadvertent or whether deliberate, and we don't know. That doesn't affect it, those issues. It's been known for about 50 years, as you've probably seen mentioned in some of the articles, that if we direct a pulse of radar, of electromagnetic energy at a person, that you can hear it. You can hear a click. It does create recordable pressure waves inside animals. Work was done on this, extensive work was done on this, supported in part by Department of Defense in the 1960s through 1980s. the type of energy that we're talking about here and the articles, it suggests, balanced system could be one of the systems affected. We don't know. The fact is, when faced with the unknown, you don't want to rule anything out. You want to check it out to see. From what we know from work that we've previously published, as Dr. Levin referred to, that the existence of balance dysfunction or disorientation to an inner ear cause can affect cognitive function. All possibilities. It's a puzzle. If you get the question, if it's a question of what done it or who done it, the answer is yes. So to summarize briefly, what I think is important that we show in this published study is that we can have measurable, quantifiable evidence that something really did happen. It's not just hysteria. You'll notice, if you look at the tables, that we drew some very strict boundaries for saying what's abnormal. Lower 5th percentile in performance. If 80% or more of the people are in the lower 5th percentile,